Hello, my name is Mark Williams and I'm Professor of Psychology at the University of Leeds. One of my areas of interest, research areas of interest, is the topic of perception. What we did in the first podcast in this series is define perception, and we learnt that perception is the process by which we obtain information about the world and about our relationship with the world. And we considered different types of information which are available to us as humans. So we talked about mechanical energy, we talked about thermal energy, we talked about chemical energy, and we also talked about electromagnetic energy, or light. And what I want to do today is just consider why light is so important to us. Why is vision so important to humans? Well, in the first podcast, I suggested that the reason perception is so important is because it provides organisms with an evolutionary advantage. If you want to understand why we perceive, we've got to look at it from an evolutionary perspective. So why is vision so important to us? Well, vision is so important to us because it provides us with an evolutionary advantage. Vision allows us to interact with the world in a skillful manner that helps us survive as a species. So vision is important to us because of its importance within evolution. So why is vision so advantageous to us in an evolutionary sense? Well, the reason that vision is so important to us is because of the prevalence of light on our planet. So our planet is bombarded with electromagnetic radiation from the sun. And we can think about that electromagnetic radiation as having different wavelengths. So we have long wavelengths and we have short wavelengths. And in the middle of these different forms of electromagnetic radiation, we have a band of radiation which is what we call light. It's the visible wavelengths. And humans are particularly sensitive to those wavelengths of light. So why have we evolved to be sensitive to those forms of radiation? The simple answer is because those forms of radiation are prevalent on Earth. So light hits objects within our environment. Some of the light bounces back, and we can use that information to tell us about the world. So light is really important to us as a species. Vision is really important to us as a species because it provides us with lots and lots of information about the world and about other individuals within the world. And that provides us, as I say, with an evolutionary advantage. So, vision is really important from an evolutionary perspective. But what does vision actually do that gives us an evolutionary edge? How has vision provided an evolutionary edge to humans? Well, I want to suggest that there are two things that vision allows us to do. So one thing that vision allows us to do is recognize objects, other organisms, and environmental layout. So if we can recognize a food substance, that helps us survive. If we can recognize that this big furry animal with stripes is dangerous to us, it allows us to run away. And if we can recognize that certain objects allow us to run through them, so we can run through grass, but other objects such as trees will cause us pain if we run into them, it allows us success. It allows us to escape predators, it allows us to feed ourselves, and of course it also allows us to find mates. So vision allows us to recognize objects, organisms, and the layout of the environment, and that's very, very important from an evolutionary perspective. And the other reason that vision's really important to us from an evolutionary perspective is because vision allows us to act. It's vision that allows us to interact with objects within the world. So if I want to reach out and touch an object, if I want to reach out and grasp an object, then I can use vision to guide my hand so that it ends up in the correct location. And of course, if I want to reach out and grasp a piece of food, then vision tells me where that piece of food is relative to my body and allows my hand to be guided skillfully so that my hand arrives at the right location. My hand can then grasp the object and bring it back to my mouth. And one of the fundamentally important aspects of vision is that it allows us to act. And if we can act skillfully in this world, then we can be an evolutionary success story. So let's just have a think about the way that vision is used, and just about its centrality within the brain for controlling actions. So I've just got a very simple task for you. So I'm going to ask you just to slap the desk with your right hand when the green circle appears, or slap the desk with your left hand when the yellow circle appears. So in the next slide, you're either going to see the yellow circle, in which case you need to slap the desk with your left hand, or you're going to see the green circle, in which case I want you to slap the desk with your right hand. It's a very simple sort of task. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to provide you with some visual information, and that visual information is going to cause you to act. It's going to cause you to slap the desk with either your left hand or with your right hand. So let's try that. So are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go. So hopefully all of you slap the desk with your right hand. And that will have taken you about 225 milliseconds. It'll have taken your teacher a little bit longer. It'll have taken males a little bit less time than females, but on average it would take you about 225, 250 milliseconds. So about a quarter of a second. So I provide you with some visual information, and about a quarter of a second later you had acted. You had generated some force on an object within the world, the desk in this instance. So let's just have a think about what happened. So I provided you with some visual information. So that generated some energy, some electromagnetic radiation, which went into your eye. And that information caused some chemical reactions at the back of your eye, the retina of the eye. And that chemical reaction then created an electrical stimulus. And that electrical stimulus was then transmitted through your brain to an area called the lateral geniculate nucleus. And that took about 45 seconds. So in 45 seconds, information had travelled through the brain to the lateral geniculate nucleus. And the lateral geniculate nucleus processed some of that information and passed the information to a part of the brain that we call the visual cortex. Sometimes we call it V1 or occipital cortex. So it's located at the back of the brain. So in this area at the back of the brain, we've got visual cortex, occipital cortex. And the lateral geniculate nucleus to V1 would have taken about 10 milliseconds. So 55 milliseconds after I showed you the green circle, that information is starting to be processed in visual cortex. And the information would have passed from primary visual cortex to an area of the brain that we call V2. So it's still in the area of the brain which is really responsible for visual sort of processing. At 85 milliseconds, the information will have gone from V2 to V4, and then it will have been transmitted down to the inferior temporal area of the brain. And this is the part of the brain which is responsible for recognizing objects. So this is the part of the brain that would have allowed you to realize that I'd shown you the green circle. So that information would have then been fed forward to the prefrontal cortex. About 145 milliseconds later, the information is arriving at the front of your brain, and that's the part of your brain which is largely responsible for decision making. And that would be the part of the brain that would have helped you to decide that you needed to slap the desk with your right hand. And so the prefrontal cortex would have then sent information to the premotor cortex. About 175 milliseconds after I first showed you the green circle, the information has arrived at the premotor cortex. It then goes from the premotor cortex to M1, primary motor cortex. It's the part of the brain which is responsible for sending signals down to your hands so that your hands can move and other parts of your body. So 210 milliseconds later, information is travelling down from M1 down to your hands in order to make the muscles contract in order to allow you to slap the desk. So 225 milliseconds after I first provided you with some visual information, an action has resulted. So you can just see how much of the brain is responsible for using visual information in order for you to generate an action. And that's an incredibly important part of human physiology, is our ability to interact in a skillful way with the environment that allows us to be evolutionary successes. So, I want you to think about the following idea, that humans are an evolutionary success because of their ability to convert electromagnetic radiation into mechanical energy. Thank you for listening to this podcast. What we'll do in the next podcast is just think about the organ which is responsible for first capturing that electromagnetic radiation. So we'll talk about the eye in the next podcast. Thank you for listening.